You are watching The Horizon, the voice of the Amber Woman, exclusively on ABC Amber TV.
The number one most important thing for every Ambazonian to do right now is the draft. We stand at the threshold of an existential struggle, a pivotal juncture in our proud history that brooks no failure, tolerates no hesitation. So we will draft incessantly, individually, within the warm, vibrant tapestries of our communities. We will draft. We must draft. Draft, for in this paramount task, our draft lies the power to liberate Ambazonia.
Mark the pages of history. December 2nd, 2019 became a landmark date. The nation of Ambazonia garnered recognition from Camara Municipal Bareri, setting the stage for an unprecedented partnership in a bold stride towards fostering deeper ties with the people and nation of Brazil. President Sacco steps into the limelight with the Brazilian press this Monday, April 1st, 2024, at the pinnacle of prime time, 7 p.m. Amber time. History is poised to unfold once more. In an exclusive encounter, President Sacco will grace VB Studio, sharing insights, visions, and the dawn of a new chapter in an interview that promises to captivate. This momentous affair will be streamed live on ABC Amber TV. Mark the pages of history. December 2nd, 2019 became a landmark date. The nation of Ambazonia garnered recognition from Camara Municipal Bareri, setting the stage for an unprecedented partnership in a bold stride towards fostering deeper ties with the people and nation of Brazil. President Sacco steps into the limelight with the Brazilian press. At this critical time of war, history is poised to unfold once more. In the government's strategic plan, President Sacco will take the forefront of the diplomatic outreach program through media and press initiatives, sharing insights, visions, and the dawn of a new chapter in interviews that promise to captivate. This momentous affair will be streamed continuously on ABC Amber TV for our esteemed viewers. Be part of this movement. This is a crucial aspect of our media warfare. Join us in this crusade.
Hello, fellow Ambazonians, fellow well-wishers of Ambazonians and viewers. Good evening from Amberland and welcome to The Horizon, the voice of the Ambazonia woman. Today, we will be talking about global politics, particularly the geopolitical relationship and tension between Russia, China, and the United States, with some parts of Europe. And also, we'll be looking at changes in leadership in Franco-Africa and how it would affect France and then the direct consequence to Ambazonia liberation struggle. So we are taking our lenses to the events of global politics and bringing it home to how it relates to us to inform and inspire our diplomatic endeavors. Today, I will be joined by Barrister Ghana to come and give us insight, information, and articulate this great subject and enlighten us so that when we ask question about diplomacy, how is it going? We are asking those questions with understanding and knowledge of global politics. Barrister Ghana, you are welcome once again to the Horizon.
Thank you very much, Lady Casey. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be here. I greet all our people within the Ambazonian community. I greet all good, willing Ambazonians who are contributing and in any way, shape, or form towards the liberation of Ambazonia. And again, it's a privilege to be here to serve, to help educate, to help answer some questions, and to help provide some triggering thoughts that are going to help us brainstorm and understand the global environment and global context towards our freedom.
Oh, I like the way you put it, the global context towards our freedom. Thank you. And this is why I said you will be enlightening all our viewers and enrich today with knowledge and global perspective of happenings towards our liberation struggle. And one of the things that have affected the Russia USA UK relationship and China has been the Ukraine war. And what are the factors that led to the Ukraine war as we know it today?
Well, if you look at the Ukraine war um, that is going on today, the war poses a certain question, and what that war poses is a question of sovereignty. The same question that that war poses in the context of Ukraine within that area is the same question that it poses in the case of Ambazonia within our area. And the question that it poses is, what is sovereignty? What is sovereignty? I mean, sovereignty defines the international status of a nation as it relates to its independence and its ability to protect its borders and protect its peoples. And it's the and the propensity of that nation or that nation state to make decisions that are in its best interest. So if you look at the situation of Ukraine, is Ukraine sovereign? Because the main reason why Russia is invading Ukraine is because this knuckle-headed guy called Putin thinks in his mind that it's possible to challenge the sovereignty of Ukraine. And in today's world, in today's community of nations, the world is telling Russia that no, it's not possible for you to challenge Ukraine's sovereignty, which also imports the reasoning to Ambazonia, and why you see some global figures saying French Cameroon does not have any title to Ambazonia. Ambazonia, consistent with UN Resolution 1608, and 1514XV, is a sovereign nation. And so the same question of sovereignty that is being asked about Ukraine is the same question of sovereignty that is facing Ambazonia. And that is why in today's world also it's going to be very difficult for Russia to win that war. It's going to be very difficult for Russia to win that war because the rules-based system of the world has ruled out trying to change borders by force, has ruled out trying to change borders by force. We saw Saddam Hussein try to seize land from Iran going back about 30 to 40 years ago. They fought a 10-year bloody war, and those boundaries did not change one bit because of the rules-based international system that you cannot change borders by force. Here we see it again in Ukraine of Russia or Putin. I don't even think it's Russia. I say it's Putin trying to change Russia's borders as of 1991 when all of those Soviet socialist republics broke away. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Belarus, Georgia, and when all of them broke away from the Soviet Union, they established their borders. And today we see Russia trying to change those borders by force. And sometimes a dictator like Putin sums up the courage to do that because he thinks that the world is going to blink. He thinks that the world is not going to be able to rise up to stand up to his aggression. And the positive thing that we see is that the Western world and its allies are rising up to Russia and supporting the Ukrainians in saying, you cannot change borders by force.
Mm. Wow, thank you. I love that perspective. It is about the question of sovereignty. And we have been screaming about our sovereignty since 1961. And this is really going to, I'm so excited about the conversation today and and how you are articulating these global politics. And Amazonians, open your mind as you listen today, open your ears and open your mind to understand, so that we will proceed to prosecute our liberation struggle with wisdom and understanding. Oh, thank you so much for that great explanation. I'm also learning some of the countries that were part of the Soviet Union. So geography is part of this learning today. So moving on to the Ukraine war. Um, Before this war started, Russia, or you said Putin, took over is it Crimea, if I pronounce that right. And Putin has been trying to expand the Russian boundaries, and you mentioned that it doesn't work. Do you think there was a way to have, this war in between Russia and Ukraine to for it to be avoided? And if so, why did the world fail to ensure that things did not get to this the extent?
That's an excellent question, Lady Casey. And you can answer that question from a lot of vantage points. And I'm going to tell you some of the highlights of reasons or rationales why this was allowed to happen. And a lot of the viewers are not going to like some of the points I'm going to make. But they say Mandela once said, you have to tell the truth. Truth is indivisible, and that nothing can be gained if factual stuff is held back. So I'm just gonna speak factually. The first thing that I think that is happening with this war breaking out between Ukraine and Russia is that, first of all, the Western world has seen the defense of the sovereignty of a nation. The Western world has seen the affirmation of a nation's sovereignty as something that is just a preserve of the West. Europe can be at peace. Some of the allies of Europe, like Japan, they can be at peace. But they've allowed other nations to challenge the borders or the sovereignty of others. I'm going to give you a case in point. It is not by accident that Putin invaded Ukraine, or Putin reached out to seize Crimea after Gaddafi was killed, not too long after Gaddafi was killed. With the UN General Assembly passing UN Resolution 1971 and going into Libya under the pretext that they were going to protect civilians in Benghazi, and overextended their mandate by killing a Russian ally, that caused the Kremlin to think that they could also violate the rule-based world. So that is something that is not generally seen. And when they went into Libya and killed Gaddafi in 2011, one of the things that Putin complained about was that who gave the West the power or the authority under UN Resolution 1971 to go into Libya and kill Muammar Gaddafi there. So the West violating the rules-based world was part of the incentive for Putin to go into the Crimea. So Putin also said, if you can do it, maybe I can do it also. The second thing, and a lot of this is why I say some of my answers a lot of people are not going to like, is that Obama was the one in power. And Obama was not too much of a consequential president. Obama wasn't too much of a consequential president. A lot of people are going to scream Bloody Mary for me saying that about the first black president of the world. But Obama blinked. Obama showed weakness, especially when things were coming onto his second term in 2012, prior to the election. He was caught on a hot mic telling Putin that just hold on. After the elections, I'm going to be a little bit more flexible with Russia. So you are blinking and you're giving Putin a suggestion that you are willing to give him some leeway on how he approaches the geopolitical situation of Russia. That is something that Obama should never have done. And you have to remember that it was under Obama also that the United States, dragged by Sarkozy of France, went into Libya and killed the leader there. So that is another reason that became an incentive for Russia to think that it could, or for Putin to think that he could have this expansionist view of going into Ukraine there. The third thing that you have to look at again is that when Putin came to power, Russia had a constitution. When Putin came to power, Russia had a constitution. And Putin came to power in 2000. And I think the Russian constitution allows for the leader to serve for 2 terms of 7 years. When it came Putin's time to vacate the Kremlin in 2014 there, he helped massage things in which Medvedev became the president of Russia, and he rotated himself to being the prime minister. And again, it just depends on his position vis-a-vis other world leaders. The West continued to deal with him as a legitimate leader of Russia. And I think Obama not being a very consequential president allowed somebody like Putin to grow those horns, and now we see it in sort of the things he is doing. So why did it happen? Why did he go and invade Ukraine? Because he thought he could do it. Because he thought the West also violated certain aspects of the rule-based order. And just because he is a knucklehead, because it's not every leader of a country that will go and invade another country close by based on the pretext of what others do. So I know it's sort of a very complex way to sort of look at it, but I think that those elements I suggested are elements which allowed Russia to go and invade Ukraine there. And how could it have been prevented? Again, it could have been prevented by the West putting a more robust defense posture in telling Putin that if you do this, these are going to be the consequences. It could have been prevented by the West. When Putin took over Ukraine in 2014 there, taking a robust stance against Russia to indicate that this cannot happen. But we saw Russia take over Crimea, and the West didn't do much. We saw Putin fomenting trouble in eastern Ukraine, sponsoring some rebel groups, and even when those rebel groups that were being funded and armed by Russia downed an airline that was flying from Europe to Asia, I've forgotten that flight number there, about 300 and something people died. The West was not very vociferous in telling Putin that this cannot happen. And the only way you allow a dictator to run rampant is to show weakness. The only way you allow a dictator to run rampant is to show weakness. We saw it in the case of Hitler. When Hitler started invading his neighbors there, we saw Churchill and the Western world saying, oh, if Hitler just wants a part of Czechoslovakia, let's let him have it. And then it became Austria, it became Poland, and before you know it, the whole world was in a flame of warfare. And we had to fight a world war to bring down a rampant dictator like Putin there. So we see the West doing the right thing now in forcefully challenging Putin and in arming the Ukrainians to fight against Putin's aggression?
Thank you. Wow, thank you very much. You mentioned there that because of Obama and Sarkozy action as one of the reasons in Libya gave Putin the justification to try and expand and take over parts of Ukraine. Um, and now I just want to take that Ukraine is very close to Europe, and we've seen other European countries also send arm, also send aid, also try to accommodate Ukrainian refugees, and also doing everything with the United States to ensure that Ukraine is not defeated in this war, that Putin agenda in some parts of Ukraine is not achieved. Do you think, as a result of that, would expand the war to other parts of Europe?
Um, Personally, I don't see this war expanding to other parts of Europe. I'm going to give you a little example that you can trace to your own primary school backyard. Or if you grew up in a neighborhood in Cameroon or in Ambazonia, you can apply this example there. So just imagine a little neighborhood in Ambazonia. And just imagine that there's somebody in the neighborhood who is seen as the tough guy, who is seen as the bully. And this bully goes around bullying little kids, catching little kids and beating them, and just being rampant. Just imagine one day some little kid says, I have had enough of this, and picks a rock. And when that bully is coming towards that person, you time his forehead and you hit him very hard with that rock. What is going to happen? The next time that bully goes around and attempts to bully other kids, that bully is going to be very careful because that bully knows that there are other kids around who can pick a rock and he is going to suffer some consequences. How can I apply this to the situation in Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine and the possibility of this conflict expanding to other nations around? Putin did not expect that the world was going to rally around Ukraine. Putin did not expect that by this time, after his invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022, there would be close to over 500,000 Russian troops killed. Putin did not expect that by this time, almost 2 years after the or past 2 years after the invasion, Ukraine would be attacking Russia and oil refineries would be going into flames. Putin did not expect that by this time, after his invasion of Ukraine, Russian troops will be, some Russians will be organizing themselves and beginning a rebel assault on Russia. So, Putin, there's one thing about a dictator like Putin as well. A dictator like Putin is always interested in their own survival. A dictator like Putin or like Beer is always interested in their own survival. And so that dictator would not want to go far or too far that threatens their own survival. Putin knows that if he encroaches on the rest of or on any NATO territory there, consistent with the articles of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, first of all, it might result to a nuclear war, and in a nuclear war, nobody wins. He might not end up being alive after it's all said and done. But also, if he attempts and NATO fully comes to confront Russia, it will probably lead to regime change in Russia. And what does a dictator want? What is a dictator interested in? A dictator is always interested first in its own survival. So, because I think Putin is first interested in his own survival and the survival of the coterie around him, I don't see this war going onto a NATO territory. Lady Casey, are you there? Lady Casey, are you there?
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Sorry for that short technical hitch there. Yeah, thank you so
Okay.
much for that great point. And putting this whole thing to in our understanding and the effects of um Russia or Putin, as we want to put it, because we're not sure if the Russia people are backing Putin on this venture. If Putin as a dictator is trying to do, and if he expands to the rest of Europe, obviously most of the European country are part of the NATO, which would lead to a much larger destruction. And obviously he is not um he might not take that risk because he will also put his own grip on power at risk. Thank you for nicely articulating that aspect. And initially you mentioned some of the catalysts, some of the things, the reasons that made Putin feel justified to expand, to try to take over um, um, parts of Ukraine, and because also what happened when they took over Crimea. And you also mentioned the fact that Britain, France, and the United States activities in other foreign territories, in other foreign countries, um, taking out leadership in some other countries, um, how Putin looking at how they are exerting their powers in other nations feel that okay he can also do the same. Do you think given what this has happened and what is going on with what America, France and UK did, for example, in Libya, and what Putin is now doing, after taking over Crimea and now trying to, fight to take over some parts of Ukraine. Do you think we would affect China attitude towards Taiwan? Because Taiwan also came out of, was also a territory or that China has been interested to take over for a very long time. Do you think it would also now give China the power or also the motivation to try and also or colonize Taiwan?
Yeah, you said you rephrased something that I said, but I just want to correct what I said. I
Okay.
did not say that Putin, the Western world attacking and killing the leader of Libya made Putin feel that he was justified. I said
Mm-hmm.
it gave him an incentive. There's a difference between a justification and an incentive. There is no justification for the invasion of Ukraine, even in Putin's mind. So the way the Western world acted in Libya, again under UN Resolution 1971, which was meant to protect civilians, but they went in there, forcefully destroyed the infrastructure, tried all they could to locate Gaddafi's caravan, targeted him, killed him, made him have that incentive to
Incentive.
think that he could also go and do it someplace else. Brilliant question you asked there about China and Taiwan, 100 miles across the straits from mainland China there. One thing that I also said that I want to bring that logic into answering that question regarding Taiwan and China is that a dictator is always interested first in its own survival. A dictator is always interested first in its own survival. I mean, we see people like Saddam, who built this whole military infrastructure, a Republican Guard, you know what, all to protect himself and his family. So we see what is happening in North Korea. The whole military infrastructure is, is meant towards protecting Kim Jong Un and his family. So a dictator is always interested first in its own survival because a dictator knows that it does not have the legitimacy of the people. How do we use this same logic to answer the question or to address the situation that has to do with China vis-a-vis Taiwan there? Well, prior to Russia invading Ukraine, Putin probably thought it was going to be a 3-week exercise. He thought he was going to invade Ukraine. At least that's what the CIA cables say, that he thought he was going to invade Ukraine. He thought the leader was going to flee and that he was going to take over. And they already had a plan to partition Ukraine to be governed by Russian generals. They already, everything was set. Even Biden, when Putin was invading, wanted to give Zelensky a ride. Biden called from the White House and he told Zelensky, I have a ride for you. I'm going to send a military plane to get you out so that you don't have to face the wrath of Russia. And what did Zelensky tell Biden? What did Zelensky tell Biden? He told Biden, I don't need a ride. I need arms. If I'm going to die in Ukraine. And that started the resistance of the Ukrainians against Russia. Had Putin knew that he was going to face the consequences that Russia is facing today, had Putin known that his invasion of Ukraine was going to lead to the depletion of Russian treasure, had Putin known that by this time after the invasion of Ukraine, over 500,000 Russian troops were going to be dead, he might not have done it. How does this affect China? Again, Xi is also a dictator. When Xi took over, going way back to the 70s, the tradition in the Communist Party in China has always been that a leader comes to power, they serve for 2 terms, and then they hand over. A leader comes to power, they serve for 2 terms, and they hand over. Xi came. He served for 2 terms. Did Xi hand over? He refused to hand over. He manipulated the setting so that he could have a 3rd term. The typical characteristic of a dictator. The sine qua non of a dictator. How does this affect the conflict or the potential conflict across the Chinese Strait? With Xi seeing what has happened in Ukraine, with Xi seeing that Ukraine did not fold and Ukraine was able to fight back, with Xi seeing the economic consequences to Russia of having attempted to invade Ukraine or having attempted Ukraine and be facing the consequences. Xi knows the calculus of invading Taiwan. You have to imagine that Russia has a land border with Ukraine. And if Russia has a land border with Ukraine and is facing this much difficulty, how about China that has a 100-mile strait of waterway between China, mainland China, and Taiwan? What are going to be the casualties of trying to take over Taiwan 100 miles away? And we see what the United States and the Western allies are already doing. They are already positioning strategic military facilities. They are incorporating the Philippines. They are incorporating South Korea. They are incorporating Japan. They are working with Australia to build a quad of nations that are prepared to defend Taiwan if China tries to change the status quo by force. And I know there are a lot of people who are listening and they are going, man, but Taiwan is supposed to belong to China. Taiwan has already been has always been part of the PRC. How come Taiwan doesn't just surrender? Well, I'm not talking about if China legitimately owns Taiwan or not. I'm talking about the way Xi sees the potential conflict, the way that potential conflict could be a repeat of what is happening between Putin and Ukraine, and looking at the consequence and having those consequences be a disincentive to Xi attempting to take over Taiwan by force. And we see the United States also passing a lot of military packages to sort of arm the Taiwanese so that this becomes a disincentive for Xi to be able to take over Taiwan by force. And there's just one thing else that I want to mention. If you're used to the world of chips, if you're used to the world of semiconductors, If you are used to the world of these high-end powered chips that are manufactured in the world, you would know that 90% and above of those chips are manufactured in Taiwan. I mean, the Taiwanese company TSMC is one of the leading manufacturer of chips. If you look at United States companies, United States tech companies that you utilize or design and manufacture these high-end chips, AMD, Intel, Nvidia, Micron, all of these countries, all of these companies, they depend so much on the chip process technology that Taiwan has. And so Taiwan is of strategic importance to the West. And if the West could go defend Ukraine, the West is not just going to roll over and let China take over Taiwan by force. So what is happening in Russia, again, to answer your question, what is happening in Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine, the consequences that Russia is facing, the military resistance of Zelensky and the Ukrainians is going to act as a disincentive for Xi to order the People's Liberation Army to go take over Taiwan.
Wow, thank you so much for that great explanation. I've learned so
You're
much.
welcome.
I mean, just now about Taiwan and yeah, technology and importance to the West, and I can understand how technology has also brought some level of insecurity, and I'm sure the West want to ensure that any means that any technology into their systems and economy is highly secure. Thank you very much for that great explanation. And I'm sure our viewers are also enjoying this conversation and learning a lot. And just stepping aside from the line of thoughts and conversation that we have been having so far, and this is just my thought. I just want to ask you what you think about this. My thought. Do you think all these conflicting interest or interest in these Western countries and then Russia, China, how they are trying to expand and their interest in certain foreign territories. Do you think it has affected their attitude towards Ambazonian liberation? And this is
Uh,
just my thought because I'm just when you are
yeah,
explaining all these things, and I can see a network, a connection of all these Western countries and both, including China and Russia, their various interests or territorial interests. Because China, for example, just took over control of Hong Kong, and now we've just throw more light on why they might be interested in taking over or colonizing Taiwan, but the incentives are not there. So looking at all the network of interest with these global powers, do you think it has affected prioritizing the putting resources to resolve the Amazonian war?
well, first let me talk about China and Hong Kong vis-a-vis China and Taiwan. The
Okay,
reason
yeah.
why China was able to so easily take over Hong Kong was because there was a 200-year agreement between the Chinese
Mm-hmm.
and the British that Britain was going to rule over Hong Kong for 200 years. And after those 200 years, they were going to hand over Hong Kong to China. And Britain kept to their agreement. So it was an agreement that was already in place. And Hong Kong is just a few miles from mainland China. So the resistance was not even possible. But when
Mm.
we talk about Taiwan, first of all, how Taiwan has not always been under the control of China. A lot of people think that Taiwan has always been under the control and sovereignty of China. That is not true. For some years, Taiwan was an independent preserve. For some other years, Taiwan was under the control of the Japanese. So Taiwan has not always been under the control of China there. And when we had uh, the Communist Party take over China under Mao, we saw the leadership of China at that time flee to Taiwan and assert their independence. And for so many years, a lot of countries recognize Taiwan as the independent Chinese nation. So there are a lot of contentions within that strategy that it's not going to be so easy for China just to run roughshod and take over Taiwan there. And the other thing is that the Taiwanese are very rich with their high advancement in process technology when it comes to manufacturing chips. They are attracting a lot of powerful friends. Again, if you look at the technology companies in the United States that are leading in chip production, like AMD, the leader of or the CEO of I mean, for the two most leading technology companies in chip production technology, their leaders are former indigenes of Taiwan. Lisa Su, who is the CEO of AMD, came to the United States with her parents when she was 3 years old. Jensen Wang, who is the leader of NVIDIA, or who is the CEO of NVIDIA, is also an immigrant of Taiwan. So Taiwan has some interconnections where they have some powerful friends, and again, with their ownership and leadership of process technology when it comes to manufacturing high-end chips, it's not just going to be easy for the West to just roll over and allow China to come take over that. Now, with all of that in relation to Ambazonia, I'm going to tell you this, Lady Casey. The people who are going to free Ambazonia are Ambazonians. And all the factors exist in the international landscape for us to free Ambazonia. We just have to know how to sell our case intelligently, persistently, and working as one, working in unison, working in cooperation amongst ourselves, which is an element that is not really there. So the freedom of Ambazonia depends on us. We just have to intelligently leverage the international community, which already knows that French Cameroon does not have any title over Ambazonia, which already knows that French Cameroon is an annexationist nation over Ambazonia, which already knows that French Cameroon moved into Ambazonia without any treaty of union. So the facts are already established. The facts are already clear. We just have to do a better job selling our case to the international community and lobbying for what must be lobbied to bring the United Nations to intervene in Ambazonia. That is a more sure path towards our freedom in Ambazonia.
Oh, that was aptly said. I mean, that cut through everything. That's just summarize the state of the struggle. I must say that was an excellent response, and I'm very pleased. Um, our viewers, I hope you are taking notes and making notes. And so now we even have the draft. It's also an opportunity for us to remember that our freedom depends on us. Wow, thank you so much for that great
And
explanation.
and and and,
And
and let me
now,
just Lady Casey, let me just expand on something. When we talk about what we have done so far to help liberate ourselves, I cannot conclude that thought without giving kudos to the true restoration forces who are fighting to liberate Ambazonia. I mean, I know there are a lot of gangs and bandits who are committing mayhem in the name of fighting for the struggle. I know there are some groups who are more interested in extorting people and bringing mayhem to their own people, and we condemn them. But the true restoration forces, especially the restoration forces under Dr. Samuel Sako and the interim government, have done a marvelous job in telling the world, in showing to French Cameroon that one AK-47 at a time, one shoulder-fired missile at a time, one tactfully planted IED on the road at a time, we will continue to remind French Cameroon that they do not have sovereignty in Ambazonia. So the restoration forces or the Ambazonia state army, as we now call them, have done their best to put our quest for the emancipation and for the regaining of our sovereignty on the map. So I say kudos to our restoration forces who are truly fighting against the barbarity of French Cameroon. I say kudos to our restoration forces who continue to put their lives on the line to tell French Cameroon, to bleed French Cameroon, to ensure that the next generation of Ambazonians do not get to live this nightmare of annexation, do not get to live this nightmare of enslavement, that do not get to lead this nightmare of being under France's and French Cameroon's colonialism on Ambazonia. So I say kudos to them. They have done their job and they continue to do their job. But it's left for us in the diaspora. It's left for us in the leadership of the struggle to do what is necessary, to network the diplomatic community, to bring the right forces to bear into bringing the United Nations to getting involved in this struggle towards regaining or the regaining of our sovereignty. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much. That was timely. So now we are going to Africa. We've talked about the conflicts in Europe, part of Asia, and looking at these global conflicts, how they are happening, so we can gain a global perspective, like you articulately explain how we should understand these things so we can leverage their resources to liberate ourselves, but it depends on us solely. And we've seen recently there have been changes of leadership in Africa and France, particularly former French colonies in Africa. And we've seen how uh, the new leaders are coming up and how it has been how it's been going on and how they have been detaching or declaring they're cutting ties with France. We've all seen all the recent in we've seen it started with Niger, Burkina Faso, most recently Senegal. We've seen these different former French colonies doing everything within their power to cut ties from France. We are watching these changes in Africa that is going on. So what do you make of all these waves that for some years now has been happening to these African countries, particularly those former French colonies?
Lady Casey, brilliant question there. And I'll start this question by answering something I said on this show about 2.5 years ago. I think I was asked a question about France and all of these cooperation agreements it has with all of these former French colonies. And I was very clear, speaking as a lawyer and looking at all of those agreements and understanding how international rules and regulations work. I said, those agreements are DOA. Those agreements are DOA, dead on arrival. Those agreements I said 2.5 years ago do not even have legal muzzle. I mean, UN resolution 1514 that was passed December 15th, 1960 gave independence to developing countries or to nations that were under colonial rule. And in paragraph 5 of UN resolution 1514 XV, it says, give independence to countries that are under colonial rule or to territories that are under trusteeships or guardianships. Give them independence irrespective of their political preparedness or irrespective of their economic status. These countries never got independence. Those French cooperation agreements were in and of themselves a violation of international law. So all of these French-speaking countries have been adhering to all of these agreements with France that are totally illegal and totally unenforceable in international law. So when we see these leaders in Mali, in Niger, in Burkina Faso stand up and repudiate them, they are repudiating something that should not even have been there. There's no reason why you should get independence and then surrender your currency to a foreign imperial power like France. So, but I want to look at it from a different perspective. Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso. That is a contiguous territory. That can become one of the superstates in Africa. That these leaders have sovereign control for now over those territories. If I were in a position to advise them, what I would be saying is just draft a plebiscite or a referendum or whatever you call it and have those countries vote towards having a political union. Make Niger, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali one nation. We do not have to adhere to these boundaries that were set by the colonialists. And so you have three military guys who are in control of those territories at the same time, who claim to be African emancipators and nationalists. Why are they tingling with having Burkina Faso be itself and having Mali be itself and having Niger be itself and having each military leader be some important strong man in their own nation? Forge a political union between those three countries, federalize it, make them states, and you have a powerful state in Africa. The powerful states in Africa in terms of population and landmass, you have South Africa, you have DRC, you have Nigeria. That whole contiguous territory can be one of them. So to me, I don't want to share and I don't want to have any opinion on whether it was right for them to take over or not. That is something else. But the fact is that they have taken over. They claim to be all people of the Sankara mindset. They claim to be more people of the Nkrumah mindset. They should forge those three territories into one and create a superstate in Africa, bringing economies of scale, economies of production, drafting a constitution that can govern those states, changing the face of Africa, drafting a constitution that can give the individuals within those states freedom to produce, freedom to create. But I was watching a YouTube speech by the leader of Burkina Faso, and I was hearing him talking about how they are going to create these projects to do this and these projects to do that, and they are going to focus on production in this way and have the youth involved in that way. I'm sorry to say that I know a lot of people watch that and they applaud and they say, "Hooray! We have an African somebody who is emancipating Africa." I don't share that view. Forcefully, I don't. Progress, economic progress on a people and for a people does not come from leaders who think they know it all, forcing a type of structured development on the people. It doesn't come that way. That's not how Switzerland developed. That's not how Sweden developed. That's not how the United States developed. That's not how Japan developed. This nation developed by having freedom given to the individuals in those countries to explode. So what those leaders should be doing is having a political union in the first place, and then writing a constitution that guarantees the rights of individuals, that guarantees the protection of private property, that guarantees individual freedoms, so that people can feel free to breathe and create, and knowing that they are creating something that will belong to them. But if they take that approach of trying to create projects that they hope to co-opt people into those projects, the imperialists that they are bemoaning about are just going to be laughing their way and sitting back, because those projects are going to fail and you guys are going to be indebted. Why are those projects going to fail? Because development does not come from top-down projects. Development comes from bottom-up inventions. Case in point, if you look at Microsoft, it wasn't some US government that created a project, that created Bill Gates, that created Microsoft. No. It was a student in Harvard, Bill Gates in this case, that quit from Harvard went into his parents' garage, was tinkling with computer software, ended up inventing MS-DOS. DOS stands for Disk Operating System. He created DOS. IBM licensed DOS. He became an instant billionaire because IBM, International Business Machine, started selling billions of computers around the world. Again, individual production, individual ownership, protected by the United States Constitution that guarantees the protection of private property. Microsoft could develop, Microsoft could attract brains from around the world who came to Microsoft, invented all of these hundreds of applications. Microsoft Word, Excel, SQL Server, PowerPoint, and much and much and much. And now we are talking about Chat GPT. Not because some government decided to force down a certain structured type of development on the people, but because the United States Constitution guarantees individual freedom, guarantees the protection of property, and gives people that room to breathe and invent.
Wow, Dr. Barrister Ghana, since I say Dr. Ghana, because that was explicit. You know, you have just explained something. I would like us to really have this conversation on another show, because the top what you have just touched at this point in time is so important for us to understand. And it's so, we'll talk about this aspect of politics creating an environment for economic activities to thrive. And I think we'll have to have this conversation in depth on another show, because I just absolutely appreciate the explanation you have just given. But I believe there is so much more that can be extracted from having that conversation in as much depth as we need to, so that we can also learn as Ambazonians, as we are growing in our nation, and we are coming together to build a nation. We need to understand how to create that dream Ambazonia we all desire and want. And what also to note, we've had blueprint of XYZ, blueprint of education system, blueprint. So if we're having a blueprint of our economic activities and how we would use the laws of economies and the politics allowing that our people can grow, like you said, breathe and be innovative and be creative. This
And
is
lady,
some aspects.
and yes, and Lady Casey, let me interrupt you a little bit by expanding on what I just said. I listened to the new leader of Senegal. He made a speech. And in that speech, he was ranting and ranting. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to spoil some
I
people's
I felt the same. Actually,
glory.
felt the same about the speech. But carry on.
Yes, he was ranting and complaining about France and complaining about neo-colonialism and complaining about this. Complain, complain, complain. When you complain against somebody, you only empower that person. When you complain so much about the neo-colonialists and the imperialists and whoever, you are saying in your own spirit that you don't have the power to change. You already have the leadership mantle over Senegal. You don't have to complain. Just go to work and do what it takes to free your people. You have presidential power in that country and potentially 2 terms of office. You need to go back to your people, structure a leadership that incorporates people with brilliant ideas. Forget about what France is doing. Protect your leadership, but institute those policies that render freedom. Institute those policies that guarantee a smooth transition of power when you are done. Institute those policies that will ensure that you have left a legacy when you leave, and not a mindset that makes you think you would have to stay in power to protect whatever you think is of your vision. If you look at the United States, it's all about a structured leadership where they do 20-year planning and and they execute. If you look at the United States, when the founding fathers started it, the first thing they did in Philadelphia, 1791, they wrote the United States Constitution. They lobbied with the other territories to incorporate into the founding of the United States, and those territories negotiated to have what we call the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments of the United States Constitution. And much of the freedom in the United States has come from that Constitution and not the emphasis of the individual. In fact, when the United States started, after they defeated the British, they wanted to make George Washington a king. And George Washington said, no, that is what we fought against the British. We don't want a rulership structure that depends on one person being a godlike structure. You come back to your people and you plan. If you look at what Europe went through, First World War, they didn't learn. Second World War, the destruction that came out of the Second World War led to Europe. One of the first things they did after the Second World War was to create the European Coal and Steel Union. That led to Europe not focus so much on resources, but on development initiatives that were outside resources. And from the European Steel and Coal Union, they evolved into the EEC, the European Economic Community. And then it evolved into the EU and single currency. And now we have a common market with a common systems in so many other regards. And when I talk about Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, that is what they should be looking at. When I talk about Senegal and its young leaders still complaining about France, when you complain about France, you give them so much power. I'm going to give you another example. When Lumumba took over in the 60s, and we can excuse Lumumba because then our eyes were not really open. One of the things that led to Lumumba's death is that in his first speech, he was railing against the Belgians. He was railing against the West. And it insulted those people to the extent that they plotted for his death. And we had this coward in the name of Bumbutu Zezeku that took over and ruined Zaire for so many years. We need to stop complaining and know that in our creation, and know that as human beings, both spiritual and physical human beings, we have the power to change our destiny only if we believe that we can. Only if we believe that our emancipation does not come from complaining, it comes from our own individual actions. Thank you for letting me expand on that.
Wow, I was just screaming at the back. Oh, thank goodness no one could hear me. My goodness, because you were just hitting every point. And fellow viewers, you can only get this level of intellectual articulation only from the horizon, the voice of the Amazonian woman. And thank you, Barrister Ghana, for you know giving more flesh to that wonderful point you already made. And I would suggest our ABC producers uh, cut this past 10 minutes of our conversation and make it an easy, accessible, shareable video for people to see, because the depth of information and knowledge in that short segment of this program tonight has been so enriching, so enriching. And thank you again. Thank you again. I'm loving it. My next question is in three layers. And we're talking about France, and I mentioned the leaders, which led to this great information that you shared. We're looking at the shaky influence of France in Africa, and how these leaders, they come up, they clearly express their dislike for French influence in these territories, in these African countries, and they are slowly, with their level of awareness and understanding, desiring to cut ties with France, desiring to no longer have French control over their countries, um, their foreign reserves. And you also mentioned how the agreement is not binding, given the independence that happened between 1954 up to 70s. Some countries got their independence much later. So, given all these things that's happening, and you see France, so the first I will ask is, with these other francophone territories in Africa, which I believe about 14 of them, how do you see their relation with France in the next 20 years?
A good way we can and that's a great question. A good way we can assess that, they say there's a quote that says the past is prelude to the future, you know, and the present is prologue of the past. And a good way to look at the next 20, 30, 40 years is to look back at the past 20, 30, 40, 60 years. And when the colonialists left, at that time, Africans still had just about less than 1% of Africans had a college education. We saw the people who took over. Ahidjo was just a P&T clerk technician that took over as the leader of Cameroon. A lot of them were just glorified grade 2 school teachers that took over without the educational sophistication. Some of them, even without that educational sophistication, were solid leaders in their own right. But again, less than 1% of Africans had a college education. Fast forward 60 years later, at least 25% of Africans have a college education. How is that affecting the present? France is finding it very difficult to find sellouts that will continue to perpetuate its neocolonialism. And that is why you see in Cameroon, they still have a diaper wearing dictator in his 90s posing as a president of French Cameroon. Because it's so difficult for them to find somebody that will accept their BS, of how they want agreements to be structured. People are more educated, people are more sophisticated, people have traveled, and you're not going to find a hand clapper that is willing to carry France's back. So we see these young leaders emerging in Mali, in Niger, in Burkina Faso. You have to take yourself back again to 1987. I think there was April 6th or so, or April 4th, that Thomas Sankara was brutally murdered. That France used the second in command, Blaise Compaoré, to stage a coup against a young revolutionary mind, Thomas Sankara, to try to impede a groundswell of African nationalist thinking. Well, you murdered Sankara, and about 30, 40 years ago, you have now about 5 Sankaras. So killing African leaders who want to emancipate Africa is not going to be the solution. And so things are changing. So if you take a look at the situation of French Africa 20 years from now, I think there's going to be more liberation. I think there's going to be more of an upheaval against France. I think the citizens from French Africa have traveled not just to France, but they've traveled to the United States. They've studied in the United States. When they study in the United States, they are coming back with revolutionary ideas where they do not want to answer to the old order. You also have to look at the French Revolution, which happened in 1769, which happened between 1769 and 1799 when Napoleon took over. France sent troops to help support the American liberation efforts against the British, which started in the 1760s, and they finally fought and defeated Britain. When those troops came back to France from the United States, when they came to the United States, they found a revolutionary people who were fighting against an oppressor, Great Britain in this case. When they came back, they had learned ideas about freedom. They had learned ideas about equality, l'égalité, liberté, fraternité, and fraternité, and all of that in my own corrupt French accent there. And so they came back and became part of this nucleus that generated revolution in France, working with the philosophers like Voltaire, Montesquieu, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. How can you import that thought and that reality to present day status quo? All of these people from Francophone Africa who were used to this dogmatic way of thinking, who were used to thinking that if I say I'm going chez moi, if I'm going home, I'm going to France. They're beginning to realize, no, France is not home. Africa is home, and they belong to a global village. So we are going to have more leaders come up in Francophone Africa that are going to be for true African emancipation. And some of these countries, if they are smart, if the leaders are smart, might band themselves into union, but we are going to have more economic prosperity, better negotiations in terms of contracts with the outside world, hopefully the empowering of the individual African so that he can create, so that he can expand, so that he can explode. One of the things that we've learned by being part of the West was that Africans are very intelligent people. Africans are very intelligent people, whether it's mathematics or biology or medicine, whatever science domain it is, even in computer engineering. I mean, there's a Nigerian guy, Philip Emeagwali, who is seen as the father of the internet. He is one of those who propounded the theories that led to the development of the internet, who conducted some research internetworking about 1,000 computers around the world to create a powerful processor which accidentally created the internet. His name again is Philip Emeagwali. Bill Clinton decorated him in about 1995 at the White House to recognize his invention and his work that led to the creation of the internet. So, with the empowering of the individual African, with more freedom coming to Africans due to the evolution of these events, we will be able to pioneer our own inventions, and hopefully we have the political leadership that will help liberate and not help oppress. So I see a positive change that is going to happen because one, we are more educated, two, we are more traveled, three, we are more global as a people, four, as we are becoming globalized, we are accumulating capital in families that are going to become the nucleus to sponsor businesses. So the new dawn of Africa is upon us. The new day of Africa is upon us. So that we are not just going to have just one Dangote, but we are going to have entrepreneurs and billionaires changing the African landscape so that Africa can take its rightful place on the global table on the economic reality of nations. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Oh, absolutely, and so well as usual. Wow, this is, I mean, just building on that, you've just explained everything, what is going to happen. You've created, you've articulated and explained the reasons why there's definitely hope for Africa, and there's hope for these nations to to create atmosphere for growth, is particularly economic growth. And how do you think this particular, because we are looking at French colonies, most of the CEMAC countries are under French control, and this wave is started with most of the countries in with French influence in West Africa. Do you think this would spread through to the CEMAC countries, and how would do you think that might affect Cameroon? And we'll get to Ambazonia. We're talking about Cameroon as in La République du Cameroon.
It is bound to spread. It is an unstoppable force. The oppression of any group of people is never a permanent affair. And again, I always, as a historian, I always like to go back to history. See, when the French Revolution happened, Napoleon came to power, and Napoleon had what we call the continental system. And with Napoleon's continental system, Napoleon wanted France to dominate Europe. And for a time, France dominated Europe. Napoleon even put his cousins to rule a lot of the parts of Europe, Austria, Spain, uh, Germany, where Germany did not exist, Prussia, and all of those principalities. Well, what did that help do? That helped galvanize those principalities, and eventually leadership emerged in Prussia under King William, I think it was King William the 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 second, with Otto von Bismarck as his prime minister, that helped unite all of those Prussian principalities into modern day Germany. And so the invasion of Europe by Napoleon, thinking that French could dominate those areas in perpetuity, eventually led to the emergence of Germany. I don't think that same occurrence is far off in Africa. Again, as we become more educated, as we become more global, and as the intelligentsia becomes more selfless, those factors are going to be created that are going to liberate French Africa and that are going to continue the liberation of Africa, whether French or English or Spanish Africa. But in the case of Ambazonia, the enslavement, the annexation of Ambazonia is not sustainable. It is not sustainable. Ambazonia, I can tell you, is the biggest headache of France in the CEMAC area. Why? Because Ambazonia is wrongfully attached to French Cameroon. And French Cameroon is the most populous nation in CEMAC. The population of CEMAC is about 50 million. French Cameroon is about, well, if you add Ambazonia to it, it's about 28 million. So the cornerstone of CEMAC is a nation which in and of itself is not stable, because Ambazonia is going to gain its sovereignty. So what happens to CEMAC at that point? Does the Ambazonian struggle now become an inspiration for other nations in CEMAC to break free of France? I see that happening, especially with increased education, with increased globalization, with leaders that are more of an emancipating intelligentsia. So Ambazonia, without doubt, is going to be free, because there is no way French Cameroon can retain Ambazonia and become a prosperous nation at the same time. So all of these little pieces that are helping to liberate Africa are in the building process. And Ambazonia is a critical part of that story. There's another thing that you have to remember. If you look at the leadership of Nigeria, Nigeria is anchored to, is next door to Ambazonia. The leadership in Nigeria is democratic and is changing. How many leadership changes are you going to have in Nigeria that are going to tolerate military action going on in its borders with between Nigeria and French Cameroon there? So the situation in Ambazonia is not sustainable, especially as the mistakes of Biya have enabled Ambazonians to take up arms. And there is no way you can bring a settlement to that conflict without speaking justice to the situation. And how do you speak justice in the situation? Well, you just have to look at U.S. Senate Resolution 684. U.S. Senate Resolution 684, which in paragraph 4 outrightly says this conflict has to be settled consistent with the root causes of the situation. And what are the root causes of the Ambazonian conflict? The non-implementation of UN resolutions 1514XV and 1608 as it relates to Ambazonia. So by the time we are done settling this conflict, Ambazonia will be yanked away from French Cameroon. And the ripple effect that that is going to have on CEMAC, your guess is as good as mine.
Woo! Wow, I am loving this conversation. I am loving it. And you have already touched on how this whole French or countries, liberation of countries in Africa, how when they, how we improve would affect Amazonia. And it has been such a rich, rich discourse. And I have loved every moment of this. And I'm so glad that we could have you today on the horizon to share this depth of knowledge and this insight to correlate history and to project into use the history information and knowledge to project into the future. And this has been such a rich show. And thank you once again so much. And we've have this whole conversation about freedoms and Ambazonia, and you mentioned something which I, before we round up on the show, which we'll be doing that shortly. You mentioned that the liberation of Ambazonia, the freedom of Ambazonia depends on us. You touch on it slightly because you were trying to make another point, which I asked a question, and you end up touching on, on the economic pathway that Africans or the revolutionary leaders of Africans can take to create the environment, which you also gave us vital information. But this part, I want us to focus on Ambazonia, which you mentioned that our freedom depend on us. As we're rounding up the program for today, and how can we pass down this message? How can Amazonian know, or what information, what consciousness should we, because I'm really finding the word, what consciousness should every Amazonian carry, or understanding should they have as we continue to fight for our total liberation? Because you mentioned that it depends on us. Someone can hear that, but what does that responsibility mean? What does it mean to each and every Amazonian?
I'm going to answer that question by bringing in two logical thoughts here. The first logical thought is when light is projected onto a scene. Let's say you have a room and you have cockroaches in there. Immediately you turn on the lights, the cockroaches want to escape. So light has that effect of bringing positivity onto a situation. What do I mean by that? No condition that involves oppression sustains itself forever. Take the case of Black Americans. They used to be under Jim Crow, under slavery. And then the world started opening up. And then there was conflict in Europe. And Black Americans had to go fight. And they came back with the ideas to free themselves up. And as the United States continued to have diplomatic relations with other nations and wanting to be a respectable nation on planet Earth, they could not continue to sustain a nation that was half free and half slavery. And so the light of global opening eventually contributed to the freedom of African Americans, especially when people like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King took over the mantle of leadership. How does this relate to Ambazonia? We know that Ambazonia does not belong to French Cameroon. We know that the only reason that French Cameroon continues to hang on to Ambazonia is because of the darkness of lack of knowledge. One of the things I said in 2017 is that we're already free, even before the armed struggle started. When our people took to the streets in Bamenda and Boya and Tico under the leadership of the consortium, and were protesting against all of these draconian measures that were being passed, judges being hoisted onto courts, judges trained in civil law being hoisted onto the courts, French-speaking teachers being sent to teach in English-speaking schools. When our people rose up and were willing to accept that, then people started asking, why are we fighting? And people who before then did not know our status as an independent people, people who before then did not know that there was no agreement between French Cameroon and Ambazonia, became educated. And once you educate a people, you have brought light. And once you bring light, freedom is not too far away. So to Ambazonian people that are listening, our freedom has already been spiritually won. We are just going through the emotional oscillations of our freedom being delivered. Because if you look at other cases in the world, when knowledge comes, when light comes, freedom is not too far away. Same thing with South Africa. The apartheid regime could keep a cloak of darkness because we're having the Cold War between the United States and Russia, and what was more important was who was in the Russian camp and who was in the Western camp, and that cloak of darkness sort of partly gave the apartheid racists in South Africa to keep blacks under wraps. But once that came apart, once we had perestroika and glasnost in Russia, and there was openness, and the Cold War sort of retract itself, then the situation in South Africa was then brought into more light. And with people like Randall Robinson with Trans-Africa, with people like the guy who was head of the COSATO union in South Africa. Then I think the head of COSATO was Cyril Ramaphosa, who eventually became the president of South Africa. With people like Mandela, who were not willing to compromise, just like Sako is not willing to compromise, freedom is going to be delivered. The
Hmm.
second logic that I want to bring is that even in secondary school, in our rudimentary subjects that had to do with logic, there's something we learned. There's a terminology we learned way back from secondary school, and that term is called analogy. And what does analogy say? Analogy says if Venus is round, and Mars is round, and Jupiter is round, and Earth is round, then Pluto must be round too. And that logic has never failed. Now,
Hmm.
if Eritrea, that never used to be part of Ethiopia and was 20% of the population and were being annexed, could fight and free themselves. If South Africa kept Namibia under wraps, trying to annex Namibia, and there was no legal agreement binding Namibia and South Africa, and they could fight and free themselves. If East Timor, that was not part of Indonesia, could fight and free itself, if Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia could fight and free themselves, then Ambazonians, by that very nature of analogy, and by the light that is being shed on the situation in Ambazonia, will fight to deliver its freedom. And to each of you guys who is listening, and you mentioned the draft that is ongoing, we are the ones we've been waiting for. The
Hmm.
emancipation of Ambazonia depends on us. Part of the reason why it depends on us is that we don't even have the right as individuals, as organizations fighting for this struggle, to trade away the freedom of Ambazonia. Because the sovereignty of Ambazonia belongs to the people of Ambazonia. When UN Resolution 1618XV and 1514XV speaks about the status quo of Ambazonia, it's not talking about some interim government. It's not talking about the ADF. It's not talking about the SCNC. It's talking about the people of Ambazonia. So even we or they who are the leaders of Ambazonia do not even have the right to trade away our sovereignty. And our sovereignty is not couched with France. Is our sovereignty couched with French Cameroon? No, it's not. Because there is no binding agreement that delivers Ambazonia to French Cameroon. Is our sovereignty couched with the UN? No, because the UN has already passed a resolution on April 21st, 1961, that defines the status of Ambazonia. They've already granted the independence of Ambazonia. To who? To the Ambazonian people. So that freedom, once the Ambazonian people rise to claim it, once they rise to defend it, once they rise to contribute in our draft towards the defense of our freedom, you know that freedom is very close by. Thank you.
Ooh. I will add absolutely nothing else to that because you have said everything. You have said it all. You have said it all. And wow, it has been a wonderful show. I will take this special moment once again. I mean, I've been so grateful to have you on the show today, Barrister Ghana, sharing such delightful insights and knowledge to the different aspects that we have discussed today, and particularly this last part to our people of Ambazonia. Hope you heard. Hope you have listened. The liberation of Ambazonia depend on us, and the draft is here for us again to come out and contribute towards the defense of our freedom. And like the analogy he used, if other nations smaller than Ambazonia in both land space and numbers were able to fight, defend themselves, and free themselves, then Ambazonia certainly can and will and is doing it. So be part of it, because whether you like it or not, whether you are part of it or not, the freedom of Ambazonia is sure and is certain. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for your contribution and your comments. Next week, join us again on the Horizon Woman. Yes, we are staying the course till Amazonia is totally liberated. Thank you. Bye bye.
The number one most important thing for every Ambazonian to do right now is the draft. We stand at the threshold of an existential struggle, a pivotal juncture in our proud history that brooks no failure, tolerates no hesitation. So we will draft incessantly, individually, within the warm, vibrant tapestries of our communities. We will draft. We must draft. Draft, for in this paramount task, our draft, lies the power to liberate Ambazonia. The number one most important.
Mark the pages of history. December 2nd, 2019 became a landmark date. The nation of Ambazonia garnered recognition from Camara Municipal Barreri, setting the stage for an unprecedented partnership in a bold stride towards fostering deeper ties with the people and nation of Brazil. President Sacco steps into the limelight with the Brazilian press. At this critical time of war, history is poised to unfold once more. In the government's strategic plan, President Sacco will take the forefront of the diplomatic outreach program through media and press initiatives, sharing insights, visions, and the dawn of a new chapter in interviews that promise to captivate. This momentous affair will be streamed continuously on ABC Amba TV for our esteemed viewers. Be part of this movement. This is a crucial aspect of our media warfare. Join us in this crusade.